Chapter 10. Sarah sat in her seat and looked outside the window. She watched the other cars go by and marveled at them. They all were so lucky. They were not on their way to therapy. They were all off to exciting places. Exciting places being anywhere else. Sarah crossed her arms and looked at her mother. She did not have to take her to see Violet. She just wanted to torture her. Sarah shifted in her seat. Sandy looked at her daughter in the rear-view mirror. "Now don't pout," she explained. "It won't be that bad." "Won't be that bad," Sarah thought. "It will be terrible." Soon, way too soon for Sarah's taste, they were pulling up in front of Violet's office. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and was about to open the door when her mother spoke up. "Babies do not unbuckle their seatbelts and open their own doors," she commented matter-of-factly. Sarah sat back down and crossed her arms again. Sandy got out of the car and went to the back of it. Sarah tried to see what her mother was doing but saw nothing till a moment later when Sandy came around the corner of the car pushing a stroller. Sarah could not believe what she saw. Her mother was gonna take her into Violet's office in a stroller, no less. Part of Sarah was overjoyed. After all, she loved being a baby and this just added to the pleasure that was this summer. Part of her was little scared as she might run into someone they know. Still, Sarah remembered what her mother said. You wanted to be a baby. And she did with all her heart. Sarah then jumped out of the car and into the stroller. It felt different than she thought it would and was surprised that it fit her. Sandy pushed her daughter into the waiting room of Violet's office. She then sat opposite of her daughter and looked her straight in the eye. "I know you do not want to be here. But this is for your own good. Violet can help you sort through some of your feelings about things and can help you become the person you want to be," she told Sarah. "But only if you are completely honest with her." Sarah continued to suck her pacifier and just nodded her head. Sandy reached into the stroller and gave her daughter a big hug. Truth be told, she was not sure how Violet was gonna help the situation. When they had talked a week ago, Violet seemed to think that she could help her daughter get over this ridiculous idea of being a baby. Sandy sure hoped so. Still, looking at her daughter made her wonder if Sarah would ever be out of diapers and a normal teen like everyone else in her class. The two of them looked around waiting for Violet to come out of her inner office. After a few minutes, Violet came out and greeted them. Soon Sarah was pushed into Violet's inner office and with an embarrassing kiss on the cheek left in the room alone with her. Violet looked at Sarah. She looked normal. In fact, she looked as normal as she always had over the past few years that Violet had known her family. Violet shook her head and sat down at her desk. "So, how are you doing?" she asked. "Okay, I guess," Sarah responded. "Just okay." "Yeah. So what's your week been like?" "What do you mean?" "Well, if I remember correctly, you have been a baby for the past week." "Correct?" "Yes." "So what's it been like?" It was then that Sarah understood the question. She started to talk about the events of the past week. She talked about how it felt to be back into diapers and to needing to be changed. She talked about eating baby food and sitting in a high chair. With each statement, Violet seemed to have more questions. Each question was easy to answer cause they were all about the past week. It was a simple session, truth be told. It was nearing the end of the hour when Violet dropped the big question. "Any idea on why you wanted to be a baby again?" she asked. "Not really. It's just something that I have wanted for the past year or two," Sarah answered honestly. She truthfully had no idea why the desire was there other than she really wanted to get what she was getting and was looking forward to the rest of summer. "Well, we are out of time for today," Violet informed her. "I'll see you again in a week, okay?" "I guess," Sarah told her. Violet then pushed the stroller out into the waiting room. Sandy stood up and taking the stroller from Violet began to leave the building. "See you next week," Violet stated as they walked out the door. Sandy was not so sure. Violet had good intentions, but it seemed a little silly to bring her daughter in to see her. Still, she thought it seemed silly to be putting diapers on her 13-year-old as well. They had just gotten Sarah sitting in the car and was putting the stroller away when a familiar voice rang out. Sandy. Chapter 11. Mrs. Clattock was what you would call a busybody. She was always getting her nose into affairs that she had no business getting into. Sandy thought about her. There must be one in every neighborhood. Sandy turned and looked directly as Mrs. Clattock. Well, hi there, she said when the nosy woman was within earshot. I was just on my way into the store when I looked up and saw you. Mrs. Clattock responded. We have not seen much of you since the summer started, and I was wondering if everything was okay. She asked in her usual nosy fashion. Everything is fine. We have just been busy. You how it is? Sandy said, trying to make pleasantries. Sarah meanwhile was worried. She had just gotten out of the stroller and into the car, it seemed, when she heard the voice of Mrs. Clattock. She hoped and prayed that whatever the crazy woman wanted would be over soon and they could leave. Sarah sat nervously sucking her pacifier and waiting for her mother to finish talking. Well, I need to be going, Sandy said. Of course. Mrs. Clattock responded and turned and walked away. Sandy looked as Mrs. Clattock wandered off and wondered. Has she seen anything? It would be so hard to explain why her daughter was in the stroller. Sandy got into the front seat and drove home. Sarah crawled into her playpen and lay down. It had been a long morning and she was tired. Truth be told, it had not been all that bad. Therapy had gone well. It was just the run-in with nosy Mrs. Clattock that made the day seem longer. After all, Sarah figured her mother could have embarrassed the heck out of her but chose not to. Sarah was not sure why her mother had shielded her, but was glad she had. Still, Sarah got to thinking. It had been a week since this wonderful thing had begun. She was in a constant state of bliss. After all, it had been her dream to be a baby again. Now she was one. Life could not get any better. Sarah yawned and fell asleep. Sandy looked at her daughter asleep in her playpen and worried. It had been a week already and Sarah seemed to be having a grand time of it. Sandy sat in her favorite chair and thought. She had managed to survive a week. But it had taken its toll on her. She had forgotten how hard taking care of a baby was. And to think there was 11 more weeks of this to go. Sandy began to wonder if it was worth it. She needed to make Sarah see that being a baby was not a good choice to make. But it seemed that Sarah was relishing every part of this little adventure. Still, it had some good moments. Sandy looked over at her sleeping daughter and could not help but smile. Sarah looked so peacefully and happy. It was hard to be mad at her. Making her happy was not a bad thing. Sandy sat up and shook her head. What in the world are you thinking? She said to no one in particular. Well, the time for self-examination was over. There was housework to do. Soon Sandy was busy with her normal cleaning routine. Sarah, on the other hand, was sleeping like a baby. Neither one fully aware of the changes that were taking place. Chapter 12. Sarah sat up in her playpen. It had been a couple of weeks since her mother had made the deal. The days were blending together. After all, each day was the same as the last. She was either in her playpen or in her high chair. She was even getting bored of being in diapers. Her day seemed to go from diaper change to diaper change. Still, Sarah was not ready to call it quits just yet. Sarah was very content. It was then that her mother dropped a bombshell. I'm going out tonight, Sandy told her daughter. Okay, Sarah replied. So tonight you will have a sitter. This piece of news surprised Sarah. Why did she need a sitter? She was more than capable of taking care of herself. She was about to tell her mother so when Sandy spoke. Normally, I would be okay with you by yourself. But you wanted to be treated like a baby and babies get sitters. Sarah just looked at her mother. So who is gonna watch me then? Sarah asked. I got a hold of Kerry. Her mother answered. Sarah looked at her mother. The only Kerry that Sarah knew of was her old babysitter from a decade ago. Kerry? Sarah inquired. Your old babysitter. Her mother responded. Sarah looked at her mother. She wanted to argue the point. That she didn't need babysitter. Still, it was hard to argue. She did need to be a baby. She was not sure as to why, only that she is filling a need in her life. Sarah looked at her mother and simply nodded in agreement. The rest of the day was pretty normal. Soon Sarah was waking up from her afternoon nap. As she stretched in her bed, she heard voices downstairs. Laughter could be heard as well. Sarah sat up in her bed. Were they laughing at her? Sarah started to cry. She was not some freak that deserved to be laughed at. Was she? Sarah just sat in her bed and sucked her pacifier as the tears fell down her face. She was just a normal kid who wanted something so bad that it hurt. Now she was getting that very thing, and it felt so good in so many ways. Yet part of Sarah was not sure. She debated going downstairs and telling them off when she heard voices coming closer to her. One thing was certain: her mother was not alone. Any minute now and she would be exposed to another person. Sarah took a deep breath. As she breathed out, her bladder emptied itself into her diapers. A second later and her mother opened her bedroom door. I see we are up, Sandy said upon seeing her daughter. It was then that Sandy noticed the tears. Have we been crying? Yes. Why have you been crying, my dear? Sarah looked at her mother. Behind her stood Kerry. Both of them looked concerned, and Sarah felt a wave of emotions come over her. Soon she found herself crying so more as she explained the reason for the tears. How she had heard the laughter and thought it was about her and how it made her feel. Sandy smiled at Sarah and brushed her hair out of her eyes. Honey, do not be silly. We were not laughing at you. Sandy started to explain. We were just sharing parenting stories and having a ball. Parenting stories? Sarah asked, and she dried her tears. Yes. Sandy said. Kerry here is a new mom and was sharing with me all the joys of having a newborn in the house. I was remembering when you were a newborn and sharing that with her. We did talk about your return to babyhood and Kerry is fine with it. That's true, Kerry finally spoke. I would never laugh at you, kid. This seemed to calm Sarah down a bit and she was able to stop crying. After a quiet moment or two. So now what? Sarah asked. I am thinking you could spend some time in your playpen till dinner. Okay. But first I think you need a diaper change. Sarah just nodded and laid down. This was another test. She was about to have her diaper changed in front of someone else. Sarah closed her eyes as her mother went to work on getting her into fresh pants. Now you may be wondering what was going on in the mind of Kerry. When Sandy had explained to her what was going on, she thought at first that Sandy must be joking. Still, standing there watching a preteen get a diaper change was not a joke. Kerry was not sure she understood everything that Sandy had explained, but figured that Sandy knew what she was doing. Anyway, soon Sarah was redressed and they were heading downstairs. Sarah walked holding her mother's hand until they got to the bottom of the steps. Then she crawled over to her playpen and crawled in. Sandy and Kerry returned to the kitchen. So do you think you can handle tonight? Sandy asked. I think so. Kerry answered, her voice shaking. It's really no different than taking care of my little one, she said, trying to reassure herself. Really, it's not that bad, Sandy said. I know it's a little unconventional. But according to Violet, this is the best way to handle things. I have done the research on the internet and I agree with her. Sarah thinks that being a baby is so wonderful. Like it's the best thing in the world, and I have to break her of that desire with a strong dose of reality. But what if after 3 months of being a baby, Sarah tells you she does not want it to end? Sandy stopped and looked at Kerry. Truth be told, the thought had never entered her mind. Sarah might enjoy this for the full 3 months and want more. That's a scary thought. Sandy stated. I know, but what then? Kerry re-asked. Truth be told, I never thought about it. I hope she does not come to that choice. Hopefully she will be so sick of being in diapers and eating baby food that she will run away from playing baby. I hope you're right. Now hadn't you better get going? Kerry responded, not sure herself. Sandy looked at her watch and simply grabbed her purse and smiled. I should be back by 10. No problem. Kerry said. Then with a wink and a smile, Sandy was out the door and on her way. Kerry sat at the kitchen table and wondered what to do. She was glad that Sandy was not sure of things. If it had been her, she would have gone crazy with the thought. Still, she was not going to have to worry about that. She was here to babysit, and that was all she was going to think about. Looking at her watch told her all she needed to know. It was about 4:30. Kerry looked down at her own body. It was then she saw the spots. She was leaking. She had not remembered to pump and needed to as soon as possible. Kerry walked into the living room to get the pump that she had thought to bring with her. When she looked over at Sarah sitting in her playpen, sucking on a pacifier and looking ever so content, it was then that an idea hit her. Sarah, Kerry spoke to get the girl's attention. Sarah looked up at her. Come here, Kerry demanded in a somewhat sweet voice. Sarah simply followed the directions. Soon both of them were on the couch, and it was then that Kerry dropped her idea on Sarah. I'm going to breastfeed you, okay? Sarah opened her mouth in shock. This was something that she never thought would happen. Why? She asked sheepishly. Because my breast hurt from all the milk in them right now. And you wanted to be a baby anyway, came the answer. Slowly Kerry undid her blouse and bra. She then coaxed Sarah's head and lips into proper position before telling Sarah to just suck away. Sarah started slowly licking her sitter's nipple. But once she tasted the sweet breast milk, she started to suck harder and harder. This was heaven. It was about halfway through the event that Sarah felt her bladder empty itself. She was truthfully acting like a baby and loving every minute of it. Chapter 13. Sandy drove in silence. She was deep in thought and it troubled her. It had been a tough couple of weeks and she was glad to get out of the house for a while. Still, some thought would not go away. Would her daughter really want to stay a baby forever? That certainly couldn't happen. Still, the thought nipped at her mind like a dripping faucet that would not let go. She began to have images cross her mind of her daughter. She saw her daughter graduating high school and getting married still in diapers. The thought made her shudder. She needed to be sure that Sarah would give up this idea by the end of summer. Sandy parked the car at the front door to the restaurant and headed inside. Violet was already seated and motioned for Sandy to join her. Soon Sandy was sitting across from her old friend. Sandy sat in silence and looked at Violet. You're oddly quiet this evening, Violet commented. Lot on my mind, Sandy responded. Like what? Violet asked simply. Sandy took a deep breath and let loose. She told her friend about her conversation with Kerry and the concerns that Kerry had raised. She expressed her concerns that her daughter may never want to give this up and the fear that this brought her. She even talked about the image of her daughter walking down the aisle still in diapers. Violet listened to her friend and thought for a moment. After a few minutes she looked Sandy straight in the eye and simply said, So? What do you mean so? I mean the very thing you think I mean. If the summer ends and Sarah does not want to give this up, then so be it. It's not the end of the world. Are you kidding me? Not at all. Not the end of the world, it would be disastrous. Why? Well, Sandy stopped and tried to think of a reason. Truth be told, nothing was coming to her mind. Listen up, Sandy. You're my friend and I want what's best for you and for your daughter. Being an infantilist is not the end of the world. Sure, it's different, but it's not crazy or anything like that. The purpose of this summer is to help Sarah. Yes, Sandy interrupted. To help her get rid of this desire to be a baby and grow up. No. Violet said. The purpose was to get her to be okay with what she is and wants. You hope that this is to give them up for good. That's your feeling and it may in fact be hers. But she has to come to the decision all on her own. Otherwise it will do more harm than good in the long run. But I don't want my baby in diapers for the rest of her life. Your baby may in fact be in diapers for the rest of her life and that's okay. At the end of the summer she will just have to learn how to take care of herself and not have you to help her. Sandy sat in silence and thought through what Violet was saying. It made sense to her in some manner and she was begging to see the light of the conversation. As dinner was winding up, Sandy remembered something that Sarah and she did every year during 4th of July. An idea popped into her head. This would cure Sarah of her baby desire once and for all. Standing up, Sandy looked at her friend. I just cannot have that in my life. She will give it up if I have to force it out of her, she said with assurance and walked away. Violet grabbed the check and watched her friend leave. God help her, she thought as she reached into her purse to grab her credit card. A pacifier fell out onto the table. Violet quickly picked it up and went to pay the check. Chapter 14. Sandy walked around the house like a busy little bee. She had a lot to do if they were going to go. And she wanted to go. She wanted to go more than anything. What fueled this desire was something simple. She wanted her teenage daughter to be just that, a teenager. Not some diaper-wearing baby. Sarah sat in her playpen and watched her mom scurry around. Something is up, she told herself and began to wonder what. Sandy went about the day working on packing up to leave for the 4-day 4th of July weekend that was coming up. Soon she had everything in order. She just had one more thing to do. Calmly she sat in her favorite chair and looked at her daughter. Sarah just smiled. Sandy reached for the phone and called her mother. This was gonna be a tough one to explain and she needed to explain it. Grabbing the cordless phone, she walked out of the room. She did not want her daughter hearing the conversation. Sarah sat in her playpen and wondered what was up. Her mother had not been that jumpy in a long time. She only gets jumpy like that when she has to deal with her mother. That was when Sarah started to put 2 and 2 together. For as long as she could remember, she and her mother had gone to visit her mother for 4th of July weekend. It was a big deal of the summer and Sarah looked forward to it. It was a time to see Grandma and her cousins and the rest of the family that lived close by. Sarah suddenly had a thought. Her mother was gonna go this year like always. She was gonna have to be a baby with all of her relatives nearby. This thought made her shudder and worry. She was okay with her baby self, but to expose it to others would be tough. She had only been able to show it to her mother because of what happened. She was not sure she could expose it to the whole family, as it were. Sarah was deep in this thought when her mother spoke to her. Sarah. Hearing her name made her jump. Sorry, did not mean to scare you. Are you ready to go? Her mother asked. Go where? Sarah tried to ask innocently. You know where, came the answer. So it was true, Sarah was gonna be a baby to her whole family. But Mom, Sarah started to say. Do not but Mom me. Sandy cut her off. You wanted to be a baby and I told you that was okay, but it had to be for the summer. You know we go to Grandma's house every year. Did you think I would cancel just 'cause you're in diapers? Well, yeah. Sarah said matter-of-factly. Well, you were wrong. Sandy continued. I am perfectly willing to take my baby daughter to visit her grandma and anyone else who happens to be there. You wanted to be a baby and so a baby you are. That means wherever we go. So suck it up. Now do you need to be changed? I don't think so. Came the answer. Sandy just shook her head and walked over to her daughter to check for herself. Sarah, you're soaked. Let's get you changed and then we are out of here. The two of them made their way up to Sarah's room and soon a diaper was changed and they were both in the car heading the 6 hours to Grandma's house. Both of them completely unaware as to how the weekend would turn out. Both worried for their own reasons as to what the weekend meant. Chapter 15. The drive to Grandma's house was a long one. It takes 6 hours to get there and both of them sat in silence. Sandy had handed Sarah her pacifier as they pulled out of the driveway and Sarah sat sucking it a little nervous. She was mostly worried about the other cars passing by. She was sure they could see her sitting there sucking on a pacifier. Sarah was deep in thoughts. She was not sure she wanted to go to Grandma's house. After all, for the past month she had been enjoying being a baby in private. Now she was gonna have to be one in a very public situation. She was going to be in diapers in front of her grandmother and all her cousins. This bothered her and she was not sure why. After all, she wanted to be a baby with all her heart. Something just did not seem right at the moment. Sandy was thinking about different things. Other than watching the road, she wondered if this trip was gonna be the relaxing vacation they were used to. Probably not, she reasoned as she pulled onto the highway. Sarah continued to suck on her pacifier. Sandy looked at her daughter and smiled. She looked good today, sitting in the passenger seat in a pink tank top and pair of jeans. Her diaper poking out of the top. Truth be told, she looked cute. Sandy wondered again about her daughter. Would she give it up at the end of summer or would she want to be in diapers for the rest of her life? Sandy had to admit she wasn't sure. So, Sandy spoke, breaking the silence. Has the summer been all you hoped it would be? What do you mean? Well, have you enjoyed being a baby again? Sarah looked at her mother. It's been okay, I guess. Just okay. Well, it's kinda boring. I see. Well, I can see that. After all, you are a teenager on some level. Still, this is what you wanted. I know, Mom. A silence fell over the car. Both of them thinking about the situation. Sarah started to think about being a baby full-time. True, she was enjoying everything, but it was no longer fun. It had become very mundane. It felt like the joy was gone. Sarah wondered how she would feel in a month. She wanted to go back to school. She liked school. Still, she liked being a baby as well. She wondered if she could somehow have both. Still, that was a month from now. Till then, she was a baby full-time. Sarah sighed as she felt her bladder give way. Wetting her diapers was getting easier. Possibly too easy, Sarah thought. She began to wonder if she was losing control. A thought that scared her. After all, she did not want diapers to be something other than a choice. Sandy listened to her heartbeat as she drove. The call to her mother about Sarah's choice was deep in her mind. She had tried to explain it, but somehow she got the feeling that her mother did not get it. Either way, they would find out at the end of the road trip. Sandy sat in the silence and wondered what her daughter was thinking. Was she worried about being a baby in front of everyone? It did not really matter, as Sandy was determined to keep her daughter as a baby till summer's end in hopes of breaking her of the idea for the rest of her life. She also thought about what Violet had said when they had dinner. Was it really about making Sarah okay with who she is? As this thought nagged at her, Sandy began to sense something she had not sensed in years. It had been a long time since Sandy had been able to sense when she needed to change Sarah. The synths had been coming back during the past month. Spotting a rest area, Sandy pulled the minivan over into a secluded spot. "What's going on?" Sarah asked as the car was parked. "You need to be changed," Sandy responded. "How did you know?" A mother always knows when her baby needs to be changed. Soon Sarah was laying down in the middle seat of the minivan and her diaper was changed. As soon as she was back in her seat, Sandy looked at her with a straight face. "Are you hungry?" she asked her daughter. "Not really. More thirsty," came the answer. Sandy reached into the diaper bag and pulled out an empty bottle and a can of formula. In a couple of seconds, Sandy handed her somewhat surprised daughter a bottle full of formula and simply said, "Drink up." With that, Sandy climbed into the front seat and pulled out of the rest area, and they were on their way again to Grandma's house. The rest of the trip went by uneventful. They did stop for lunch at a McDonald's and soon they arrived at Grandma's house. One thing bothered Sarah as they pulled up. She had to poop really badly. She hoped to hold it for as long as possible. Why, she was not sure. As they approached the door to the house, Sarah felt her bladder give way as she soaked her diaper. Grandma opened the door and with a big hug greeted each of them. As she hugged Sarah, the concentration Sarah had loosened and Sarah proceeded to poop into her diaper. Chapter 16. Sarah hugged her grandmother nervously. She was well aware of her present state. "Hello Sarah, my how you have grown," Grandma said. It was at that moment that the smell hit everyone's nose. "Smells like I have to change someone." Sandy spoke up. "You mean she is actually in diapers?" Grandmother inquired. "Yes, Mother. I told you all about it on the phone. Sarah is a baby for the summer." "I thought you were kidding." "Well, I wasn't." Grandma stood and looked at her daughter and granddaughter for a moment. She had the feeling of someone trying to grasp a difficult concept and not getting it. "Well," she said after a moment, "the guest room is yours." "Thank you, Mom," Sandy responded as she whisked Sarah inside for a much-needed diaper change. Soon a diaper was changed and Sarah sat up on the bed. Sandy sat down on the bed and looked at her daughter. "I want you to stay here for a few minutes. Your grandmother and I need to talk in private." "Okay. Okay, Mom." With that, Sandy placed a pacifier in Sarah's lips and left. Sarah laid back down and began to think about what the weekend held. She was not sure about anything anymore. She had wanted to be in diapers and be a baby for so long, and now some of it was starting to rub her the wrong way. She saw the strange look in grandmother's eyes and knew that tomorrow she would see the same look in everyone's eyes. It began to make her feel very uncomfortable. Sarah started to cry a little at the thought of what was coming. Part of her tears were for sadness and surprising part of them were for joy. She wanted to be a baby and from the looks of it got exactly what she wanted. Sarah wondered what they were talking about in the other room. Sarah strained her ears to try and pick up the conversation. But all she could hear was mumbles. Their voices were not loud enough to pick up and distinct words. It was then she heard her mother plain as day scream, "I want my daughter to get over the idea of being a baby, and if this is the best way to do it, I will." Sarah was shocked. She thought her mother was doing this out of love. Instead, she was doing this out of something else altogether. Sarah lay back in the bed and cried herself to sleep. A while later, Sarah woke up and looked around her. Her mother was looking at her and smiling. "Are you okay, honey?" Sandy asked. Sarah wanted so badly to tell her mother off. After all, she had just learned that her mother was punishing her with baby treatment, not loving her with it. But looking into her mother's eyes at that moment, all she could think to say was, "I'm fine. Good, everyone is downstairs waiting for you." "Everyone?" Sarah said apprehensively. "Yes, everyone, now let's get you changed and downstairs." It was then that Sarah realized she was soaking wet. Soon she was in dry diapers and her mother was helping her to her feet. "Mom, yes dear, what about pants?" Honey, it's too hot for pant, and besides babies often run around in just diapers and a t-shirt, and you are a baby for the summer. Sarah looked at her mother in shock. She actually was gonna let her wear just diapers. Sarah was not sure about this. She had hoped to hide her baby state a little bit. Now it was gonna be on display for everyone to see. Sarah slowly left the guest room and headed down the hall to the main living room. She could hear everyone talking as she approached the room and felt a quiet when she entered into the room. Everyone looked up and saw her enter the room. It seemed like forever with everyone staring at her. But in reality it was only a second. Soon a strong man stood up from his comfy chair and walked over to Sarah. He reached out and gave her a big bear hug. "I thought you were gonna sleep the whole weekend away, Sarah." "Not a chance, Uncle Jack," Sarah answered. That seemed to release the tension in the room. Soon everyone was hugging her and talking about stuff. The fact that she was standing there wearing nothing but a diaper and a t-shirt was not even brought up. Soon everyone settled back down in their chairs and Sarah looked around the room for a place to sit. "Over here," her mother called her. Sarah looked over and was surprised to see a playpen set up. Course, she thought as she walked over and climbed in. The conversations that were happening before Sarah walked into the room resumed, and Sarah just sat in her playpen and listened. Sarah would learn later that Grandma, with her mother's help, had explained to everyone what was going on and that everyone had agreed to keep things as normal as possible. Otherwise Sarah and Sandy would have left, and that would have been sad. Chapter 17. Sandy slowly pulled into the driveway. It had been a good weekend. Still, she was glad it was over. After turning off the car, Sandy looked over at her sleeping daughter. Sarah was sound asleep, sucking on her pacifier. Sandy had to admit she looked peaceful. Just like she did as a baby all those years ago. Sarah stirred in her seat. "We home?" she asked sleepily. "Yes. Let's get you upstairs to bed." Soon, Sarah was upstairs and sound asleep. Sandy was soon climbing into bed. Laying under the covers, she stared at the wall. Sandy had to wonder. It seemed like everything she tried to do to get her daughter to grow up had failed. Her family had been no hope at all. Sandy was beginning to think her daughter would never be a normal teenager. She even began to imagine her daughter in many stages still wearing diapers. Stages like going to school, learning to drive, going on dates, going to prom, all the while Sarah was well diapered. A few tears fell from her eyes. No, she thought. There had to be a way. She just could not let this happen. Sandy slowly brushed the tears from her eyes. Soon Sandy was falling asleep. The next morning Sarah woke up to a very wet diaper. Laying in bed, Sarah began to think. Okay, it was more like worry. She had been waking up wet the past month. She had also been wetting her diapers without trying. This worried Sarah. After all, even Sarah knew she could not stay in diapers after the summer ended. Sarah was even looking forward to school in the fall. She was looking forward to joining cheerleading team again. Something she could never do if she was still in diapers. Still, she loved being a baby. She loved the feeling of being in diapers and being taken care of. The conflict inside her made her cry. After all, part of her wanted to go out and spend the month hanging around with kids her own ago. Maybe hook up with a friend or two. But that would mean that she would have to give up wearing diapers and being a baby. Could she really do that? Finally, Sandy walked into the room. Sarah sat up and came to a decision. She was done with being a baby and wanted to go out and be a teenager for the last month of summer. She looked directly at her mother and told her so. No. What do you mean no? I told you when this first started that if you wanted to be a baby then it was for the whole summer. I meant it then and I mean it now. But Mom, Sarah exclaimed as her mother slid the diaper under her rear. No buts, her mother proclaimed as she taped the diaper in place. You were the one who wanted to be a baby. Sarah just lay there. Her mother was right. She had been playing baby. Truth be told, Sarah did not know why she had been playing. It all seemed so stupid. Sarah was tired of being a baby. She was tired of wearing diapers and spending all day in that playpen. But the look her mother gave told her she would have no choice. Summer would not end for 4 more weeks. She was stuck in the life of a baby until the first day of school. Which Sarah felt in that moment could not come soon enough. Sandy had a different thought going through her mind. The thought was one simple word: finally. Chapter 18 Conclusion. It had been a long summer in some ways. Still, as Sarah lay in her bed waiting for her mother to come in and remove her wet diaper, Sarah hoped her mother would hurry, as she did not want to be late on the first day of school. Sarah should not have worried. Sandy opened the door and looked into Sarah's room. "Why aren't you in the shower yet?" "I was waiting for you. My days of diapering you are over. Get up." Sarah got out of bed and went to take a shower. The whole time she was washing, her mind was a mess. The summer was over and she was back being a normal teenager. This made her feel strange. Part of her was happy to be going to school. She had missed her friends over the summer and was looking forward to catching up. Not that she was going to tell them about her summer. The other thing she was feeling was a sadness. She had loved so much being in diapers and everything. Sure, it was hard the past month, but for the most part it had been fun. But that time was over and she had better get on with it. Sarah got out of the shower and wrapped a towel and went back to her room. Meanwhile, Sandy was doing some thinking of her own. The past month had indeed been a tough one for reasons that were beyond explaining. Sandy had talked to Violet about many things and had come to some startling realizations about what her daughter meant when she said she was a teen baby. Still, the time for her to be a baby was over. At least for now. School started today and Sandy was worried about other things. She was thinking about those other things when Sarah walked back into her room. "Mom, can I get a little privacy, please?" "In a minute. We need to talk." Sarah looked at her mother and simply sat down on the bed. "So talk." "Honey, I need you to understand that I love you. I know this last month was tough on you and I did it for a reason. You needed to see that you cannot just be a baby anymore." "I do, Mother. I am not done." "You needed also to understand that you are a teenager and a baby at the same time. During this summer you got to explore what it means to be a baby and hopefully you know how much of a baby you want to be." "I guess so." "Good. Now, however, you need to be a teenager and go to school and get good grades and all the other stuff. This does not mean that you need to give up being a baby. While I was babying you this summer, I was also reading a lot online. I learned a few things that I want to share with you later, when we have time. The most important is that when you want to be a baby, I will support you." "Thank you, Mom. There is one more thing. I wanted to listen to what I have to say and do what I tell you. I think it would be wise if you wore this to school today," Sandy said as she handed her daughter a pull-up. "But why? You have not gone potty for the past 3 months and this last month it seemed like you did not even know you were going. I do not want you to wet your pants at school. So this is the solution. Keep it dry all day and tomorrow you can wear regular panties." "Okay." Sarah thought about what her mother had said. The sad thing is that it made perfect sense. She had been wondering about her level of control all morning and this seemed like a good solution. "Okay. Listen, in case it does not stay dry all day, come to the nurse's office and I will get you a new one." "Okay, Mother," Sarah said. "Now can I get dressed, please?" "Of course." And with that said, Sandy left the room. Sarah stood there for a moment. She then figured that it was better late than never and got dressed, pull-up and all. Soon she was off to school and looking forward to the next chapter in her life. Epilogue. Violet closed her notes and began to think about the summer. She had done the right thing. Sandy seemed to understand the need and Sarah seemed to accept who she was. That first day of school was a tough one, but Sarah did manage to keep her pull-up dry all day. That night she slept in regular panties and went to school the next day in them as well. The rest of Sarah's school life was like any normal teenager's. Sarah studied hard and got good grades. She dated casually and even went to her prom. As for her need to be a baby, Sarah would come home and on weekends spend one day in diapers. It seemed to be all that she needed. As for how I know all of this, well, that's another story that if I have time I will tell you. The end.